Alex Ayala didn't leave Wimbledon with a trophy. She left with something far more valuable: respect. Not the polite kind athletes receive after a decent tournament. The kind that changes how an entire sport sees you. That's what makes this story so unusual. 2 days after producing the biggest upset of her career, Ayala walked off center court following a heartbreaking 3-set loss to Jasmine Paolini. On paper, it looked like the end of a remarkable run. But inside the tennis world, the conversation sounded completely different. Former players weren't asking why she lost. Analysts weren't questioning whether she belonged. Instead, they were talking about what the match had revealed, because sometimes a defeat tells you more about an athlete than a victory ever could. So, here's the question. How does a player lose a match yet leave the tournament with more belief surrounding her than ever before? The answer has very little to do with the final score. It has everything to do with what happened before it. 48 hours earlier, Alex Ayala stood on that same court after one of the biggest victories of the entire tournament. She had defeated EAC, one of the most accomplished players of her generation, in a performance that stunned fans around the world. For many players, a win like that becomes the defining moment of an entire career. For Ayala, it became the beginning of a much bigger story, because the real test wasn't beating a champion. It was discovering whether she could handle everything that came afterward. The attention, the expectations, the emotional exhaustion, the pressure of proving that one unforgettable performance wasn't simply lightning in a bottle. When she returned to center court to face Jasmine Paolini, the result mattered. But the way she competed mattered even more. That match showed qualities that don't appear on a scoreboard. Composure, resilience, the ability to solve problems under pressure, the willingness to keep fighting when momentum shifts against you. Those are the traits coaches notice. Those are the traits champions recognize, and those are the reasons so many people walked away believing Alex Ayala had reached an entirely different level. But none of that happened overnight. Long before center court. Long before Wimbledon. Long before the world learned her name. There was a 13-year-old girl standing in an airport saying goodbye to her family and boarding a flight that would change her life forever. She wasn't leaving because success was guaranteed. She was leaving because chasing an impossible dream sometimes requires impossible choices. That journey began thousands of miles from London in the Philippines. And without understanding that journey, it's impossible to understand why one painful defeat ended up becoming the most convincing proof yet that Alex Ayala truly belongs among the world's best. Long before the packed stadiums, long before the television cameras, long before millions of people around the world knew her name, Alex Ayala was simply a teenager chasing a dream that offered no guarantees. At just 13 years old, she made the biggest decision of her young life. She left the Philippines to continue her tennis development at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain. Think about that for a moment. Most 13-year-olds are worried about school, friends, or what they'll do over the weekend. I aborted a flight to another continent, knowing that everything familiar was about to disappear. A different country, a different culture, a different language, and a completely different level of competition. There were no promises waiting for her. No guarantee she would become a professional. No guarantee she would ever play on center court. Only an opportunity and the willingness to work harder than she ever had before. Years later, when she reflected on those early days, she didn't talk about trophies. She talked about family. She remembered practicing after school with her brother and grandfather. She laughed while describing herself as the little girl with ruffled socks, light-up shoes, and chubby cheeks. Those memories weren't just nostalgic. They reminded her why she started playing tennis in the first place. Because before tennis became a career, it was simply something she loved. That perspective became one of her greatest strengths. Professional tennis can be an incredibly lonely sport. Once the match begins, there are no teammates to rescue you. No coach allowed to step onto the court and change the momentum. Every decision belongs to you. Every mistake is yours to overcome. Every point becomes a test of your ability to stay calm under pressure. Learning those lessons at a young age helped shape the competitor Ayala would eventually become. Life at one of the world's most respected tennis mice was demanding. Every player had talent. Every player dreamed of reaching the professional tour. Every practice was an opportunity. but also a reminder that nothing would be handed to anyone. Progress wasn't measured by headlines. It was measured by countless ordinary days, early morning fitness sessions, hours on the practice court, video review, recovery. Then the process began again day after day, month after month, year after year. That's the part fans rarely see. They remember the trophies. They remember the upsets. They rarely see the thousands of quiet hours that make those moments possible. Ayala continued improving. She built an outstanding junior career, winning some of the sport's biggest junior titles and establishing herself as one of the most promising young players from the Philippines. But junior success is only the beginning. The professional tour is an entirely different challenge. The serves are bigger, the rallies are faster, the margins are smaller, and experienced opponents expose weaknesses that junior players often never had to confront. Like almost every young professional, Ayala discovered that progress wasn't always linear. Some weeks brought confidence, others brought disappointment. Before arriving at Wimbledon, she had played 6 Grand Slam main draws. She had won only 1 match. For many young players, numbers like those can become a source of frustration. Outside her own team, expectations began to cool. Most analysts viewed her as a talented prospect who still needed time. Recent tournaments seemed to reinforce that opinion. She suffered difficult losses against accomplished players including Karolina Muchova, Jelena Ostapenko, and Leylah Fernandez. There was no shame in losing to opponents of that caliber. But confidence in professional sports often depends as much on timing as results. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Those defeats all came in the months leading into Wimbledon. From the outside, it looked as though Ayala was still searching for answers. Few people expected her to make a deep run in London. The draw only strengthened that belief. Waiting in the 3rd round was EAC, a multiple-time Grand Slam champion and one of the sport's most accomplished competitors. For most observers, it looked like the end of a promising tournament. Instead, it became the beginning of one of Wimbledon's most unforgettable stories. When the Wimbledon draw was announced, Alex Ayala's path looked brutally short. Standing between her and the second week of the tournament was EAC, a multiple-time Grand Slam champion, a former world number 1, one of the most accomplished players of her generation. On paper, it wasn't the kind of matchup that produces fairy tales. Most predictions expected Swiatek to advance comfortably. After all, Ayala entered Wimbledon having won just 1 main draw match at a Grand Slam. Swiatek had spent years proving she belonged among the sport's elite. The gap in experience couldn't have been much larger. But tennis has always had a habit of ignoring expectations. From the opening games, something felt different. Ayala wasn't playing like someone hoping to survive. She was playing like someone who believed she belonged. She matched Swiatek rally for rally. She trusted her movement. She attacked when opportunities appeared. Most importantly, she never allowed the occasion to become bigger than the next point. Later, Ayala explained her mindset with 4 simple words: 1 point at a time. In reality, it's one of the hardest disciplines in professional tennis. Center court can overwhelm even experienced players. The history, the atmosphere, the pressure. Every distraction invites an athlete to think about the future instead of the present. Ayala refused to let that happen. Her attention never drifted beyond the point in front of her. The opening set quickly became one of the most compelling battles of the tournament. Long rallies pushed both players to their limits. Neither woman gave away easy games. Every hold of serve felt earned. Swiatek created chances. Ayala answered every challenge. When the set reached a tiebreak, the pressure reached another level. Swiatek earned 2 set points. One more point and the momentum of the match would almost certainly belong to the favorite. Ayala stayed calm. She saved both. Then, after creating opportunities of her own, she converted her 4th set point to steal the opening set. Suddenly, center court wasn't waiting for an upset. It was watching one unfold. The second set only strengthened that feeling. Ayala continued striking the ball with confidence, taking calculated risks without abandoning the patience that had carried her through the first set. Swiatek searched for answers, but the rhythm that had defined so much of her success never fully returned. According to the official match statistics, Swiatek finished with 44 unforced errors, an indication of the pressure Ayala consistently applied throughout the match. Game by game, belief spread around the stadium. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a brief hot streak. This was a young player performing with remarkable composure against one of the very best in the world. Then came match point. One final rally, one final shot, and suddenly it was over. Alex Ayala had produced the biggest victory of her professional career, one of the biggest upsets of the tournament. The crowd rose to its feet, but the most unforgettable moment hadn't happened yet. As she stepped toward the microphone for her encore interview, the emotion finally caught up with her. Before she could finish her first answer, tears filled her eyes. She spoke about the people who had been there long before the headlines. Her family, her brother, her grandfather. She smiled through the tears as she remembered practicing after school in the Philippines, wearing ruffled socks and light-up shoes, never imagining that those childhood afternoons would one day lead to center court at Wimbledon. Then she said something that resonated far beyond tennis. For players who have already won multiple Grand Slam titles, one victory may simply become another chapter. For a young girl who grew up dreaming about this moment from thousands of miles away, it meant everything. There was another remarkable connection. Just a few years earlier, Ayala and Swiatek had appeared together in graduation photos from the Rafa Nadal Academy. One athlete had already become one of the biggest stars in the sport. The other was just beginning her professional journey. Now they had met on one of tennis's greatest stages. And this time it was Ayala walking away with the victory. It was a full-circle moment that few could have imagined. Within hours, her name was everywhere. The Philippines celebrated. International media took notice. Analysts began asking a different question. Not whether Alex Ayala had the talent to compete, but whether this victory marked the arrival of tennis's next rising star. As extraordinary as that night felt, the greatest test of her Wimbledon journey was still waiting. Only 48 hours later, she would return to center court, not to prove she could beat a champion, but to prove she could handle everything that came after becoming one of the biggest stories in the tournament. Pulling off a career-defining upset is one thing. Proving it wasn't a fluke is something entirely different. That's the challenge every rising star eventually faces. The celebration ends. The headlines fade and suddenly everyone wants to know the same thing. Can you do it again? For Alex Ayala, she had less than 48 hours to answer that question. There was barely enough time to recover physically from one of the most demanding matches of her career. Mentally, the challenge was even greater. She had just defeated one of the biggest names in tennis. Her phone was flooded with messages. The Philippines was celebrating. International media wanted interviews. Fans around the world suddenly knew who she was. For a young player experiencing that level of attention for the first time, staying emotionally balanced is almost as difficult as winning the matches themselves. Standing across the net was Jasmine Paolini, an experienced competitor, a former Wimbledon finalist, a player whose speed, consistency, and relentless movement force opponents to earn every single point. Unlike Swiatek, Paolini rarely gives rhythm away. She asks a different question. Can you stay patient long enough to create your own opportunity? From the opening games, it was clear this would be a completely different kind of battle. There were no quick winners, no long stretches of momentum. Every rally felt like a contest of discipline. Every service game demanded complete concentration. Paolini claimed the opening set 64. It wasn't because Ayala played poorly. It was because the margins at this level are incredibly small. A few missed first serves, a handful of extended rallies, one or two critical points. Against elite opponents, that's often all it takes. Now came the real test. Many young players struggle after experiencing the emotional high of a breakthrough victory. Energy drops. Confidence fades. The tournament suddenly feels heavier than before. Ayala responded differently. She settled herself. She slowed the match down. She trusted the process that had carried her this far. Midway through the second set came one of the defining moments of her entire Wimbledon campaign. Serving at love 40, 3 consecutive breakpoints. One mistake could have changed everything. Instead, she played some of her most composed tennis of the afternoon. One point, then another, then another. She erased all 3 breakpoints before holding serve. The crowd responded immediately, not because it was the loudest point of the match, but because everyone understood what they had just witnessed. Pressure reveals character, and Ayala wasn't shrinking from it. She was growing through it. That escape became a turning point. She raised her level. Her movement became more confident. Her forehand carried greater conviction. She began dictating more rallies instead of simply reacting to them. The reward came quickly. Ayala captured the second set 6-4, forcing a deciding set against one of the tournament's most experienced competitors. Center court sensed another unforgettable finish. The final set became exactly what Grand Slam tennis is supposed to be: physical, tactical, unpredictable. Neither player wanted to surrender control. Every hold of serve felt significant. Every rally demanded complete commitment. In the closing stages, Paolini's experience made the difference. She stayed composed during the biggest moments, protected her lead, and closed out the match 6-3 in the deciding set. Ayala's Wimbledon run had come to an end. But something remarkable happened as she walked off the court. The applause didn't sound like it usually does after a fourth-round loss. It sounded like recognition. Fans weren't simply applauding the effort. They were acknowledging the arrival of a player capable of competing deep into Grand Slam tournaments. The scoreboard recorded a defeat. The tennis world saw something entirely different. It saw resilience. It saw maturity. It saw a young athlete who had proven that her victory over Ovich wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime performance. It was evidence that she belonged on one of tennis's biggest stages. And that realization would become far more important than one result. When athletes lose at Wimbledon, the headlines usually focus on one thing: the result. Who advanced? Who went home? Who moved one step closer to the trophy? But every once in a while, a match leaves behind a story that can't be measured by the scoreboard. This was one of those matches. Yes, Alex Ayala lost. But by the time she left center court, very few people were talking about the defeat itself. They were talking about what she had become over the previous week. Just days earlier, she arrived at Wimbledon as a talented young player still searching for a breakthrough at Grand Slam level. Now she was leaving as one of the tournament's biggest revelations. That's an extraordinary transformation. And it wasn't built on one upset alone. It was built on everything that surrounded it. She defeated one of the world's best players without looking overwhelmed by the moment. She followed that performance by pushing an experienced Wimbledon finalist to 3 competitive sets. Then, after the toughest loss of her season, she faced the media with remarkable composure. When asked what made the difference against Paolini, Ayala didn't search for excuses. She acknowledged that her opponent made life difficult. She admitted her serve wasn't at its best. And then she said something that revealed just how quickly she was growing as a professional. Everyone has days when they don't play their best tennis. That's part of the job. No complaints about the surface. No attempt to explain away the result. Just honesty. That mindset may not create headlines, but inside professional sports, it's one of the clearest signs of maturity because every elite athlete eventually learns the same lesson. You don't grow the most from your easiest victories. You grow from the matches that expose where you still need to improve. Ayala understood that. Instead of treating the defeat as the end of her Wimbledon story, she spoke about it as another step in her development. That perspective matters. Players who stay emotionally balanced after both victories and defeats tend to improve more consistently over time. The week also represented a historic milestone. By reaching the 4th round, Ayala produced the deepest Grand Slam singles run ever by a Filipino player in the Open era. For tennis fans in the Philippines, the achievement reached far beyond one tournament. It represented possibility. Young players across the country suddenly had a new reference point. Someone who proved that competing with the world's best wasn't an impossible dream. Success like that changes expectations not only for one athlete but for an entire generation. Perhaps that's why the reaction after Wimbledon felt so different. Analysts weren't asking whether Ayala belonged at this level anymore. That question had already been answered. Instead, the discussion shifted toward what came next. How high could her ranking climb? Could she become a consistent second-week player at Grand Slams? Could this tournament become the turning point that launched the next phase of her career? Those are very different questions from the ones people were asking before Wimbledon began a week earlier. Many observers wondered whether she was ready for the biggest stage. Now they were wondering how far she could go on it. That's the kind of change a single tournament can create. Not because it guarantees future success. Nothing in professional tennis is guaranteed. But because it changes belief. The belief inside a player, the belief inside a coaching team, and the belief of everyone watching. By the time Alex Ayala packed her bags and left London, she hadn't simply earned ranking points or prize money. She had earned something far more valuable. Credibility. And once a young player earns that from the tennis world, the next chapter often becomes even more exciting than the first. When Alex Ayala walked off center court, the scoreboard recorded a defeat. History may remember something very different. Not because she reached the quarterfinals, not because she lifted a trophy, but because Wimbledon became the tournament that changed the conversation around her forever. Just a few weeks earlier, many people still viewed Ayala as a promising prospect with undeniable talent, but limited experience at the highest level. After Wimbledon, that description no longer felt complete. She had stood toe-to-toe with one of the greatest players of her generation and won. She had followed that breakthrough by pushing another elite opponent through 3 demanding sets. Most importantly, she had shown that her game and her mindset could withstand the pressure of the biggest stage in tennis. Those lessons don't disappear when a tournament ends. They become part of a player's identity. Every great career has a moment when belief starts matching ability, not the belief of fans, not the belief of commentators, the belief of the athlete. The confidence that comes from knowing you've already succeeded against the very best. That kind of confidence can't be taught. It has to be earned. And Ayala earned it at Wimbledon. Of course, one remarkable tournament doesn't guarantee future Grand Slam titles. Professional tennis has never worked that way. The tour is relentless. Opponents adjust. Expectations grow. Every breakthrough creates a new challenge. The question now isn't whether Alex Ayala can produce one unforgettable week. It's whether she can build on it. Can she make second-week appearances at Grand Slams a regular occurrence? Can she continue climbing the rankings? Can she transform this breakthrough into long-term consistency? Those answers will come with time. But for the first time in her professional career, those questions feel realistic rather than hopeful. That's perhaps the biggest victory of all. Her Wimbledon run also meant something much larger than individual success. For decades, tennis fans in the Philippines dreamed of seeing one of their own compete deep into a Grand Slam. This tournament brought that dream closer than ever before. Somewhere in the Philippines today, a young girl is picking up a tennis racket after watching Alex Ayala. She may be practicing on a public court. She may be dreaming about center court without knowing how she'll ever get there. Years from now, she may look back on this Wimbledon as the moment she started believing that someone from the Philippines could stand among the very best in the world. That's how influence spreads. One breakthrough inspires another. One dream gives life to the next. And sometimes the greatest legacy of an athlete isn't measured by the trophies they collect. It's measured by the people they inspire to begin their own journey. As for Alex Ayala, her story is still in its earliest chapters. There will be tougher opponents. There will be disappointing defeats. There will almost certainly be setbacks that test everything she has built. That's the reality of professional tennis. But after Wimbledon, one thing is no longer up for debate. She belongs not because of one upset, not because of one remarkable week, but because she demonstrated the qualities that define elite competitors. Composure under pressure, resilience after setbacks, humility in victory, and honesty in defeat. Those qualities don't guarantee championships. They create the opportunity to compete for them. And that's why this story was never really about losing to Jasmine Paolini. It was about proving that Alex Ayala's breakthrough wasn't a lucky moment. It was the arrival of a player ready to compete on tennis's biggest stages. If this Wimbledon was only the beginning, the next chapter could be even more remarkable. And if you want to follow that journey as it unfolds, be sure to subscribe because one thing is certain, the tennis world will be watching. And after this tournament, so will